He looked me right in the eye, no hesitation, no smile, and said, "Your stories are useless, Grandma." Then he smirked. Not cruelly, not even knowingly. Just that hollow, distracted kind of smirk kids wear when they're not really looking at you. He went right back to his phone, thumbs dancing across the screen, like nothing had just happened. Like I hadn't just had my heart cracked open by a child I helped raise. The room went quiet, just for a second. We were sitting at the dinner table I've owned for 43 years. Same one Harold and I bought when we first moved into the house. I'd made pot roast, his favorite. A new recipe for the cornbread, too. But no one commented. They never do anymore. My son, Nathan, looked up briefly from his wine glass. I waited for him to say something, maybe even a gentle correction. He just cleared his throat and said, "Ryan, don't be rude." But he didn't look at me, just went back to slicing his roast. Kelsey, my daughter-in-law, gave me a weak smile. One of those tight, apologetic looks people wear when they want to avoid the mess. No one stood up for me. No one said, "She's not useless." No one told that boy he was wrong. I forced a laugh. That's what women my age are trained to do when we're embarrassed in public. Laugh it off. Don't cause a scene. Be gracious. Be quiet. "Well," I said, trying to make my voice sound light. "Maybe Netflix will think otherwise, one day." They chuckled, not because they believed it, because they thought it was adorable that I still had dreams. But here's the truth they didn't know. I wasn't joking. I have boxes, actual boxes, of handwritten stories in my attic. Some I wrote when I was teaching high school English. Some I wrote when Harold got sick. Some I wrote to help little Ryan sleep when he used to curl up in my lap every Sunday night while his parents were too busy. But now I'm just background noise in my own home. That night, after everyone left, I cleared the dishes in silence. The clink of silverware against the plates echoed like church bells. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped something sacred out of me. Useless. It rang in my ears. Not just the word, but the confidence he said it with. That unshakable assurance teenagers have when they think they know everything. It wasn't just the insult. It was how normal it felt for them to disregard me. I was invisible. There was a time when my voice filled this house, when I read poetry under the stars with Harold holding my hand, when Ryan begged for one more story before bed, when Nathan used to say, "My mom tells the best stories. She should write a book." Now I'm the old woman who talks too much, the voice that gets tuned out at dinner, the hands that once cradled generations, now only good for stirring soup. But here's the part none of them saw coming. That night was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. It's funny, isn't it? The moment someone tries to erase you is often the exact moment you become unforgettable. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when people listened, really listened, when I spoke. My name is Evelyn Moraine, and I've lived 74 years on this earth, most of them right here, in this house, on Maple Hollow Road in Virginia. It's not fancy. The porch creaks, and the wallpaper's starting to peel, but every corner holds a story. I was a high school English teacher for 31 years, the kind who made kids read Shakespeare out loud until they stopped laughing and started feeling it. I believed in stories the way other people believe in science or prayer. I still do. Stories connect us. They teach us who we are. But somewhere along the way, I became someone to be tuned out. My husband, Harold, passed away 12 years ago. Lung cancer. Quietly. Like everything he did. We were married for 41 years. He never said much. But when I told a story, he always looked right at me, like it was the first time he'd heard it. Every time. When he died, the silence in this house became something I had to wrestle with. I started writing again. Short stories, essays, little memoirs, mostly for myself. I filled up journals, typed out pages on my old Dell laptop. I'd even send a few stories to Nathan, my son, just to see if he thought they were any good. He never responded. Nathan, my firstborn, the baby I rocked on my shoulder through 100 colic-filled nights. He's 50 now, corporate lawyer, lives in Arlington in one of those neighborhoods with coated gates and glass staircases. He calls every second Sunday, always 5 minutes before dinner, always says he can't talk long. His wife, Kelsey, is the kind of woman who brings store-bought dessert and says, "I just didn't have the time to bake." She's polite, punctual, and thoroughly uninterested in anything outside her world of brunches and Pilates and perfect holiday photos. And then there's Ryan, my grandson, 17 years old, head full of clever remarks and earbuds he never removes. He used to love sitting on my lap while I told him bedtime stories. I made up a whole world, once called Thimble Hill, just for him. It had dragons that couldn't breathe fire, and a clumsy knight who only wanted to be a painter. He used to ask, "What happens next, Grandma?" like he was starving to know. Now he scrolls through videos faster than I can say hello. They all come for dinner once a month, always on a Sunday. It's a routine Nathan calls honoring traditions, but it feels more like ticking a box. They stay for exactly 90 minutes, say the right things, compliment the food, then disappear in a cloud of politeness. No one asks what I've been writing. No one notices the stack of printed stories on the piano bench. Bethany does, though, my best friend. She lives 2 doors down in the yellow house with the overgrown rose bushes. We met in college, back when we still wore beads in our hair and marched for civil rights. She's the only one who reads my stories now. Sometimes she even calls me late at night, crying, saying how one reminded her of something from her past. Bethany believes in me when I forget to. She always says, "They don't see you now, Evie. But one day, they'll wish they had." And I used to smile and say, "Well, by then, it'll be too late." But the truth is, I never really believed it would be too late. Not until Ryan said those words. "Your stories are useless." That sentence didn't just come from a teenager. It came from a culture, from a world that has decided older women don't matter unless they're baking, babysitting, or dying. That dinner wasn't just a family visit. It was a quiet funeral for everything I thought I still meant to them. But I wasn't buried yet. They may have stopped listening, but I hadn't stopped speaking. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of quiet afternoon that makes you think everything's still okay, even when you know deep down it isn't. I'd spent the morning doing what I always do when they're coming over, fussing. I changed the tablecloth. I lit Harold's old cinnamon-scented candle. I even pressed the napkins, because my mother taught me that a well-set table was a sign of love. You don't show up to love empty-handed. The roast was perfect, the gravy just thick enough. I had even baked my apple cobbler from scratch, Kelsey's favorite. I wanted it to feel like something, like family. They arrived exactly 7 minutes late. Nathan apologized out loud, but his eyes were still glued to his phone. Kelsey kissed my cheek and said the house still smelled like fall. Ryan didn't say anything, just mumbled, "Hey," and slid into his seat like it was a chore. We made small talk. Kelsey talked about her fundraiser. Nathan bragged about closing a client who owns half of Fairfax. Ryan scrolled. I asked about school. He grunted. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I brought out one of my stories, not to show off, not even to be read out loud, just to share, just to try. I had printed it out, tucked neatly in a folder. 4 pages, double-spaced, Times New Roman. The story was called Harold's Hands. It was about my late husband, and the way his silence had always spoken more than words. I wrote something, I said quietly, placing the folder next to my plate. Just a little something about your grandpa. I thought maybe Ryan would want to read it someday. That's when he said it, without even looking up, with his thumbs still moving across that tiny glowing screen. Ryan muttered, "Your stories are useless, Grandma." He didn't shout it. He didn't even mean it to be cruel. That was the worst part. It wasn't some big dramatic insult. It was casual, a throwaway comment, like I was a throwaway person. Time slowed. Kelsey let out a short, nervous laugh. "Ryan, don't be rude." But it was too late. The words had landed. Nathan didn't say anything, just took another sip of wine like nothing happened. Like I hadn't just been gutted at my own table. I looked at the folder. My hands were shaking. I smiled, though, because that's what we do, right? Women like me, we smile through the sting. "I guess I'll keep it for myself then," I said softly, sliding the story back under my plate. Ryan shrugged. "I mean, no offense, but nobody reads stuff like that anymore. Nobody. Not him, not Nathan, not Kelsey." I cleared the plates early that day. We didn't even make it to dessert. I said I was tired, that I needed to rest. They left before sunset. As I stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes that no one appreciated, I thought about how many hours I had poured into that story. Every line had come from somewhere deep. Years of marriage, widowhood, grief, memory. Every sentence was a thread pulled from my soul, and my grandson reduced it to useless. What made it worse wasn't that he said it. It was that no one disagreed. That's the betrayal that hits you hardest. Not being attacked, but being dismissed, being seen and still ignored. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I didn't even tell Bethany. I just sat in my chair with the TV off, staring at nothing, replaying that moment again and again. I had brought a gift to my family table, a piece of myself, and they left it untouched. That was the moment something shifted inside me. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was clarity. If they didn't see value in my voice, maybe it was time someone else did. That night, after the dishes were clean and the house went quiet, I sat alone in my reading chair, the one Harold bought me for my 60th birthday. It's worn now, the cushion slightly sunken on one side, but it holds me, the way he used to. The fireplace was cold. I didn't light it. I didn't even turn on a lamp. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the creaks of the house around me. They say silence is peaceful, but that kind of silence, the kind that follows humiliation, it scrapes at you. I looked down at my hands. These hands have held babies, buried a husband, clapped at graduations, wiped tears from cheeks. They have written over 200 stories, real stories, human stories, and still, I could hear it. Your stories are useless, like an echo stitched into the wallpaper. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but something about Ryan's words felt too heavy for tears, like it went deeper than sadness. It was erasure. I felt erased, so I got up, walked to my little study, just off the kitchen. It's nothing fancy. Shelves of mismatched books, an old desk Harold built me with his own hands. There's a photo of us on the wall, our honeymoon in New Orleans. I'm laughing in that picture. I don't even recognize her sometimes. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. That's where I keep all the old notebooks, the ones with bent covers and pages curling at the edges. I opened one and started flipping through. Yellowed paper, ink smudges, my voice on every page. I found a story I had written when Ryan was 3 years old. It was called The Boy Who Asked Too Many Questions. He loved it. He used to beg for it. Again, Grandma. Again. How did we go from that little boy to this? I turned to my laptop and opened a blank document. The white screen glared at me, judgmental and cold. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at it. My fingers hovered above the keys. Then I typed one line. The boy who said stories don't matter, forgot who raised him with them. I stared at the sentence. It wasn't for Ryan, it was for me. A memory came flooding back, something I hadn't thought about in decades. When Harold was dying, during those last few months, I would read to him every night, even when he couldn't speak, even when he couldn't hold his own hand anymore. I asked him once if he could still hear me. He blinked once for yes, and then he squeezed my fingers. That was the last thing he ever did. So no, Ryan, stories aren't useless, not when they're the only thing holding two people together in a hospital room, not when they're the only thing keeping a person alive in someone else's memory. I closed the laptop. I didn't have the energy to write that night, but I didn't tear up the story this time either. I didn't throw the pages away. I didn't give up. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I climbed up into the attic. It was late, close to midnight, but I needed to see something. I pulled the cord on the ceiling and climbed those creaky wooden steps, flashlight in hand. The air smelled like cedar and dust. There, in the corner beneath an old quilt, was a brown storage box. It had a label in Harold's handwriting, E's Stories. I froze. I hadn't seen that box since before he got sick. I pulled it down gently, carried it to the floor, and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of printed stories, carefully stacked. Some were in folders, others clipped with binder rings. But what caught my breath was the letter sitting on top. It was from a publishing house, dated back to 1997. A rejection, yes, but not a cold one. The editor had handwritten a note at the bottom. Ms. Moraine, you have a beautiful, resonant voice. With some trimming and time, these stories could live far beyond the page. He had saved it. Harold had saved it. All this time, I thought my stories lived in dusty corners, but he had seen them. He believed in them enough to keep them safe. Even when I didn't, I sat there in the attic, surrounded by my own forgotten words, and I whispered, I'm not done. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. After finding that box in the attic, after reading that letter from a publisher I'd forgotten even writing to, something inside me wouldn't sit still. It was like a door had been cracked open, one I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Morning came slowly. The sunrise hit the attic window in long, golden stripes. I hadn't moved from the floor. My legs were stiff. My fingers ached from flipping through pages all night. But I didn't care. I was holding pieces of my soul that I thought were lost. I brought the box downstairs and spread the papers out on the living room floor. My stories, my voice, all of it still alive. And then, something else caught my attention. Wedged at the very bottom of the box was a small flash drive. Just a cheap, black plastic USB with no label. I turned it over in my hands. I didn't remember putting it there. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop. It took a few seconds to load. Then, I saw the folder. Bethany, contest entries. I blinked. Bethany? I opened it. There were 6 of my stories, perfectly formatted, with a cover letter addressed to a literary contest I didn't remember submitting to. Then, I saw the email thread. She had submitted them for me. The last message was from a small online writing journal I'd never heard of. The subject line read, "Shortlist notification, the last firefly." I clicked. Dear Miss Moraine, your short story, The Last Firefly, has been selected for the finalist list in our Winter Fiction Showcase. While we regret that it was not chosen as the winner, we were deeply moved by the emotional depth and character work in your piece. If you have additional stories, we welcome future submissions. My mouth fell open. I had been shortlisted, recognized, admired, and I didn't even know it because Bethany never told me. But she didn't need to. She knew I wasn't ready to believe in myself back then. So she did it for me. That's what a real friend does. They see your worth when you've forgotten how to look. I called her the second I composed myself. When she answered, I didn't say hello. I just asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" She laughed quietly. "I figured you'd find it when you were ready." I sat down on the floor, surrounded by my life's work, and I laughed too. The kind of laugh that sounds more like a sob. The kind you've been holding in for years. She said, "Evelyn, your stories aren't useless. They're just waiting for the right eyes." That phrase echoed in my mind all day. The right eyes. That afternoon, I went back into my office and started rereading my old manuscripts, one by one. Stories about heartbreak, resilience, motherhood, growing old, growing up, all written in my voice. Honest, unpolished, real. And for the first time, I didn't see a hobby. I didn't see scraps or relics. I saw property, intellectual property. I Googled how to pitch stories to production studios. I found guides on screenwriting, formatting, agents, email templates. I read them like a woman possessed. I wasn't naive. I knew I wasn't going to walk into Netflix and drop off a stack of papers. But I also knew what most people forget. The world runs on stories. And I had plenty. Later that week, Bethany came over with a tray of lemon bars and her laptop. "Let's clean some of these up," she said. "Make them shine." So we did. Every evening, with tea and old jazz records playing softly in the background, we edited and organized. We created a table of contents. We selected 5 strong pieces and wrote a short bio for me. It read, "Evelyn Moraine is a retired English teacher from Virginia who writes about grief, grit, and the things women carry. She believes no story is too small to matter." I stared at that line for a long time. No story is too small to matter. Neither is the woman who wrote them. That was the moment I stopped feeling invisible. I hadn't been erased. I had just been filed away, waiting for someone to reopen the folder. And this time, that someone would be me. There's something delicious about pretending you're still asleep while the rest of the world assumes you've already faded. I didn't tell anyone. Not Nathan, not Ryan, not even my neighbor Donna, who lives to repeat whatever the block is buzzing about. I kept my chin down, my voice quiet, and my moves deliberate, because now I had a plan. And this time, I wasn't waiting for permission to matter. Bethany and I got to work like 2 women on a mission. We started with what I had, a binder full of polished stories, a shortlist credit, and an entire lifetime's worth of emotional truth woven into prose. But we needed a way in, someone who would take us seriously. Bethany had a nephew, Mark Bennett. I'd met him once, years ago, at a neighborhood barbecue. Quiet, lanky kid, always scribbling in a little black notebook, even while eating ribs. Turns out, Mark had grown into a freelance scriptwriter out in Los Angeles, struggling, hungry, and constantly looking for new material. "Do you think he'd read my work?" I asked Bethany one afternoon. She shrugged. "He'd read a napkin if it told a good story." So we packaged up 3 of my strongest pieces, ones with clear characters and cinematic potential. A story about a widow rebuilding a greenhouse after her husband's death. Another about a Southern bus driver who writes poetry on her steering wheel. And The Last Firefly, the one that had been shortlisted years ago. We didn't send an email, no pitch deck, no attachments. We printed them out, bound them, wrapped them in brown paper with a string, like a gift. On top, I wrote a note. Dear Mark, you don't know me well, but I've been writing for longer than you've been alive. Bethany says you love a good story. Here are a few I've carried for far too long. Warmly, Evelyn Moraine. Bethany mailed it. No tracking, no expectations. And then, we waited. I went back to my routines. I baked. I gardened. I even went to Ryan's choir recital, though he didn't look at me once. At dinner the next Sunday, I brought my pecan pie. Nathan asked about my week. I smiled and said, "Oh, nothing much. Just dusting off some old papers." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Still writing those grandma stories?" I smiled politely. Always. They had no idea. That same evening, after they left, my phone rang. "Hi, is this Evelyn?" The voice was young, uncertain, and breathless. "This is Mark, Bethany's nephew. I finished the stories. I don't know what to say." I held my breath. He went on. "I read them all in one sitting. Evelyn, they aren't just stories. These are episodes. These are scenes. One of them made me cry, and I'm not even sure why. I can see the characters. I can feel them." I sat down slowly, my legs too shaky to hold the weight of the moment. "I showed a friend who works in development," he added, just casually. "She said they feel like something Netflix would call elevated emotional realism. Whatever that means." I didn't say a word. I just closed my eyes and let it land. He asked if he could develop a script based on one of them. I told him yes, on one condition. "I don't want a ghostwriting credit," I said. "If my name isn't on it, it doesn't exist." There was a pause. Then Mark said, "Good, because I already wrote your name at the top." From that moment forward, the plan was simple. Let them keep thinking I'm just the sweet old lady with too many notebooks. Let them think I'm harmless. While behind the scenes, I started organizing copyrights, uploading drafts to the Writers Guild registry, and learning terms like IP protection and option agreement. I wasn't just telling stories anymore. I was packaging a legacy. And no one saw it coming, especially not the people who sat at my dinner table every month and mistook silence for surrender. It's funny how people stop asking questions once they believe they already know the answer. For weeks, I kept playing the same role. The quiet grandmother, the polite hostess, the woman whose life had supposedly settled into retirement and recipes. I let them believe I was still just tinkering with old stories to pass the time. But behind the scenes, I was working harder than I had in years. Mark sent me his first draft of the pilot episode for The Last Firefly adaptation. I read it 3 times in one sitting. He'd transformed my quiet, aching little story into something cinematic, poetic, but sharp. He kept my voice, my pacing, my emotion, but he added his own fire to it. It was real. I gave him one note. "Don't soften the ending." He replied, "Wouldn't dream of it." Within a month, his development contact at a small but aggressive production company had taken interest. They were looking for grounded, mature storytelling with emotional gravitas. That's what they called it. I called it finally being heard. We scheduled a virtual pitch. Mark presented. I watched quietly from my dining room table, wearing lipstick for the first time in a year. I didn't speak until the end. When I did, I simply said, "These stories aren't about revenge or tragedy. They're about being erased and choosing to come back anyway." The exec nodded. "You've got something here." 1 week later, they offered an option agreement for 2 stories, with a possibility of expanding to a limited series. It wasn't a Netflix deal yet, But it was real. It was professional. It was a door I never thought I'd even find, let alone walk through. And I hadn't even told Nathan. Until the next Sunday. They arrived at the usual time. Nathan brought wine. Kelsey wore her usual, too loud perfume. Ryan wore the same apathy on his face. "Grandma," he said with a yawn. "Still writing?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Actually, someone's interested in turning a few of my stories into a show." They all blinked, like they hadn't heard me right. "A show?" Kelsey asked. "Like, on YouTube?" "No," I said, pouring tea. "An actual production company. Possibly a streamer, depending on the next round of development." Ryan laughed. Actually laughed. "Wait, are you serious?" Nathan gave a polite chuckle, as if humoring me. "That's nice, Mom." I looked him straight in the eye. "It's not nice. It's a business deal. Legal. Binding. With royalties and everything." The room went still. "I had a lawyer friend review the option agreement," I added. "It's solid. They think there's strong market potential for older female protagonists. Apparently that's trending." Ryan sat back, blinking. Kelsey's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Then I dropped it. They called it elevated emotional realism. Said it reminded them of Maid, with a southern soul. Silence. Kelsey finally smiled, like someone had just remembered to include her. "Well, maybe now you'll finally get on social media, Evelyn. We can help you with branding. Right, Ryan?" He mumbled something and looked at his phone. Nathan suddenly seemed very interested. "What kind of rights did you sign over?" I smiled. "Don't worry, Nathan. I didn't sell the farm. I kept full authorship and creative approval. They're licensing. I'm not desperate." He blinked, clearly stunned. I stood up and walked to the piano bench, where I'd kept the old stack of stories for years that nobody ever touched. I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table, in case any of you actually want to read one. No one reached for it. That night, after they left, I stood at the window and watched their car drive away. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Stillness, but not the lonely kind. The solid kind. The kind that comes when you know you don't need anyone's permission to exist fully. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't yelled, guilted, or shamed them. I simply told the truth and let the weight of it land. They would go home and talk about it. Try to figure out what I was really doing, how serious it really was. But I knew what I was doing. I was telling the story of my life. And for the first time, the world was listening. I didn't hear from Nathan for 2 weeks after that dinner. No texts, no calls, not even the usual automatic calendar reminder he sends me when their next visit is scheduled. Just silence, which told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't confused. He wasn't busy. He was calculating. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. First came the concerned call from Kelsey. "Evelyn, sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy. "I've just been thinking about you so much lately. It's so exciting about your stories, but I just want to make sure everything's being handled. You know, safely. It's a lot for someone your age." There it was. Not even subtle. I played dumb. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing. I just mean contracts, money, taxes, all that legal stuff. I mean, you've always done things on your own. But this is a different level, don't you think? Maybe Nathan could help oversee it." There it was, the hand, reaching back for the reins. I kept my voice calm. "Actually, Kelsey, I've already got a professional literary agent, and Mark's lawyer friend has been walking me through everything. The royalties go directly to an account I control. Fully notarized, fully mine." She was quiet for a beat. Then, "Oh, that's so smart of you. I'm just so impressed. We're all so impressed. I hung up before I rolled my eyes too hard and strained something. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, certified, from a lawyer I didn't recognize. It was a notice of intent to establish financial guardianship, filed by my own son. I sat at the kitchen table and read the first paragraph 3 times before I understood what it meant. Nathan was trying to take control of my estate. His reasoning: recent changes in behavior and engagement in unverified financial ventures. Unverified. He meant my writing deal, my own success. The betrayal hit harder than Ryan's words ever did. My son, the boy I once nursed through measles, who I stayed up nights worrying about in college, who I helped make mortgage payments for during his first year of marriage, now believed I was incompetent. Or worse, wanted me to look like I was. Bethany came over the moment I called. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just sat beside me while I stared at the letter, hands trembling. "I didn't see it coming," I whispered. "Yes, you did," she said gently. "You just didn't want to." She was right. But that didn't mean I was going to let it happen. I pulled out every document I had: the registered copyrights, the notarized agent agreement, the licensing contract, the witness affidavit from Mark's legal contact, confirming my full cognitive participation in every decision. I sent a polite but blistering response through my lawyer. It ended with this line: "If my son continues to pursue guardianship without just cause, I will respond in court, not as a mother, but as a fully capable, legally protected businesswoman." It shut him down within 72 hours. But it broke something in me I didn't know could still be broken. Later that week, Nathan came to see me in person. No Kelsey, no Ryan, just him. He stood on my porch like a man who'd forgotten the house he grew up in. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. "Mom," he said, "I was just trying to help." "No, Nathan," I said quietly. "You were trying to contain me." He looked down at his shoes. You're doing things we didn't expect." "I raised you to believe that women can surprise you," I said. "I didn't think I had to keep proving it." He looked like he wanted to cry, or argue, or both. But I wasn't there for that. I stepped outside, closed the door gently behind me, and said, "You're not losing me. You're just not controlling me." Then I walked right past him, down the steps, and into my garden. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote the final page of a new story. It was about a woman who never stopped being powerful. She just had to remember that power didn't have to roar to be real. She only had to stop whispering. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want an apology from Ryan, or a tearful confession from Nathan. I wasn't looking to be rescued or celebrated. What I wanted, what I needed, was something simpler. I wanted peace, and I finally found it. It's strange how quickly life shifts when you stop asking for validation and start trusting your own voice. After the guardianship mess, after the call stopped, after the silence settled in again, I realized something. The silence didn't hurt anymore, because this time I had filled it with myself. 2 months later, I moved. Not far, just 30 minutes west, into a cozy cottage at the edge of a wooded ridge, with a porch that faces the sunrise and a screened back door that sings when the wind moves through it. Mark helped me find it. He said it looked like someone should be writing novels in it. He wasn't wrong. I still keep my old stories in a cedar chest near the fireplace. But now, there's a new stack on my desk. Freshly printed drafts of The Last Firefly, and 2 more episodes. My name is listed first in the writing credits. It's funny how the industry likes to say, "created by." Those 2 words once felt so distant. Now they feel personal. I created this. I created all of it. One morning, not long after the move, I stood outside with a mug of tea, watching the mist lift from the trees. A deer wandered to the edge of the property and stood there like a painted statue. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It was one of those sacred moments where nothing happens and everything is happening. That's when I knew I was home, not just in geography, in myself. Bethany visits every Thursday. We sit on the porch and trade pages and stories and gossip about the lives we've already outlived. We laugh harder than we ever did in our 20s. She says, I'm glowing. I tell her I finally stopped dimming the light. As for Ryan, I got a letter in the mail last week, handwritten, clumsy penmanship. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. I was just being dumb. I saw the trailer for the show. It's actually really good. I didn't know your writing could feel like that. I guess I never listened. I want to, if that's okay. Love, Ryan. I smiled, folded it, placed it inside the first notebook I ever wrote a story in. The one about the boy who asked too many questions. Maybe he still will. Maybe not. But either way, it's okay. Because I no longer write to be seen. I write because I am. The world moves fast. People forget. They overlook. They underestimate. They erase. But here's the thing about stories. Real stories. They wait. They survive. They carry us long after our voices go quiet. They become bridges between generations, between grief and healing, between silence and truth. And no one, not even your own blood, gets to decide their worth. Not anymore. The last scene of the last Firefly script ends with an older woman standing in a field, arms wide, eyes closed, letting the night air move through her like music. No dialogue, just stillness. Mark asked me why I wrote it that way. I said, because sometimes the loudest moment in a person's life is the one when she finally stops asking to be heard. That's how I feel now. Still, rooted, alive, and not one bit useless. They once called my stories useless. Now the world calls them unforgettable.